I stood at my own wedding, smiling like every bride dreams of doing. And then the best man raised his glass. His words cut me open in front of everyone. My husband had been with my sister. The laughter, the gasps, the silence, it all froze in that moment. I felt the ground vanish beneath me, but I refused to fall. I swallowed the pain. I held my head high, and I made a vow no one heard. If they turned my wedding into humiliation, I would turn their lives into ruin. The room was glowing with candlelight, laughter bouncing off the ballroom walls when the best man raised his glass. My heart was still racing from the dance floor, my cheeks aching from smiling, when he cleared his throat and smirked at the crowd. "To the groom," he said, his voice dripping with that cocky charm only men who've had too much whiskey can muster. A man so lucky, he didn't just win one Gregory sister's heart. He managed to keep both sisters warm on those cold Denver nights. The room erupted. Laughter, gasps, forks clattering against porcelain. A cheer from some drunk cousin in the back. And then silence, thick, choking silence, as what he'd said sank in. I froze, champagne glass half raised in my hand. My new husband's arm stiffened against mine, his smile faltering. My sister, in her pale blue bridesmaid's dress, flushed scarlet, but didn't look away. She stared at the floor with that guilty smile I'd seen before, the one she wore when she thought she was clever enough to get away with something. My stomach dropped like I'd been shoved off a cliff. My ears rang. The air in the room felt thinner, and I swear I could feel every eye on me. Family, friends, strangers, witnesses to my undoing. The best man laughed nervously, raising his glass higher. "Relax, folks. It's just a joke." But no one was laughing anymore. The weight of his words had already poisoned the room. I turned to my husband, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for something. But he just forced a laugh, shrugged like it was nothing, and clinked glasses with the man who had just burned our lives to the ground. And my sister? She finally looked up, right at me, and she smiled. Not wide, not big. Just enough to tell me the truth without a word. It was real. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me, but I didn't move. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the glass or storm out. I lifted my champagne to my lips and swallowed the burn, tasting bitterness that had nothing to do with the drink. "Savannah," my mother whispered, her hand brushing mine under the table, trembling. She thought I might faint. She thought I might collapse in front of everyone. But I didn't. I smiled. A soft, practiced smile that froze my face into place while my insides twisted. I let the toast end. I let the applause sputter out. I let the music start again, like the night hadn't just been set on fire. Because right there, in that ballroom, while the flowers still bloomed on every table and the cake sat untouched in the corner, I made my decision. If they turned my wedding into their entertainment, then I would turn their lives into my stage. I glanced at the guests, my father staring into his drink, my cousins whispering behind napkins, colleagues exchanging knowing looks, and I saw it. Pity. That was the crown they'd given me to wear. The pitiful bride. No, not me, not for long. I leaned into my husband when he kissed my cheek, letting the world believe I was still his bride. I let my sister hug me, her perfume thick and suffocating, her hand lingering just a little too long on his shoulder, as if daring me to see. I let them all think I was weak. Inside, though, I felt the ice harden around my heart. Each laugh at that table, each whispered glance across the room, each smirk, they weren't breaking me. They were sharpening me, because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. And one day soon, when the candles had long burned out and the flowers had withered, every single person who watched me suffer in silence that night would see the truth. The betrayal was public. The revenge would be too. I raised my glass again, just once more, letting the gold liquid catch the light. My hand was steady now, my voice calm when I said, "To loyalty." A few scattered claps followed, confused, uneasy. My husband squeezed my hand under the table as though trying to reassure me, as though I hadn't just seen my whole life fracture in front of me. I squeezed back. Harder. Not with love, with promise. And when my sister's smile faltered for the briefest second, I knew she felt it too. The game had begun. If you'd asked me 6 months before the wedding what my life looked like, I would have told you it was the closest thing to perfect I'd ever known. I was 33, settled in Denver, and finally in a rhythm that felt stable, almost enviable. I had a fiancé who made me laugh, a family that, at least on the surface, was close, and a career that gave me both independence and pride. My mornings started in a little condo overlooking the city skyline. I'd brew a pot of coffee, open the balcony door, and let the chill of the mountain air wake me up while the sun painted the streets below. I'd scroll through emails for the marketing firm where I worked, juggling campaigns for tech companies that thought branding could solve all their problems. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And it gave me the kind of life where I didn't have to check the price tag before ordering dinner out or booking a weekend getaway. And then there was him, Marcus, my fiancé. Everyone said he was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who could walk into a room and own it without trying. He was a financial advisor with a roster of wealthy clients, and he liked to joke that his real skill wasn't managing portfolios, but managing people. And maybe he was right, because people loved him. He knew how to make strangers feel important, how to remember names, how to tell stories that made even the most ordinary details seem fascinating. I loved that about him, or at least I thought I did. He'd pick me up from work with that easy grin, kiss me like he'd been starving all day, and ask about the smallest details of my day, like what font I'd chosen for a campaign or how the intern was doing. He made me feel seen, important, like I wasn't just another cog in the wheel. My sister Lila was part of the picture too. 2 years younger than me, she'd always been the free spirit, the one who took risks I never dared, who dyed her hair pink in college, who moved in and out of jobs and boyfriends like they were trial runs for something bigger. She had a way of making everything feel like an adventure, even when it was chaos. Growing up, I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who got the grades and followed the rules. Lila was the storm, and somehow, despite all the clashes and rivalries, we were still close. Or at least I thought we were. She'd tease Marcus sometimes, calling him Mr. Wall Street, or rolling her eyes when he talked about markets like they were living creatures. But she also laughed at his jokes, leaned in a little too close when he spoke, and touched his arm in that casual way she touched everyone's. It didn't register as anything then, just Lila being Lila. We'd meet for Sunday brunch at a cafe downtown, the three of us sharing pancakes and mimosas. They'd tease me about being too serious, about always ordering black coffee while they split a bottle of champagne. I'd laugh because it felt good to have the two people I loved most in the same place, getting along. Looking back now, those brunches were rehearsals, subtle auditions for the betrayal I didn't see coming. My parents adored Marcus. My mother said he was steady, just what Savannah needs, while my father liked that he could talk sports and money with equal ease. My family embraced him like he was already one of us, and every time I saw my mother's approving smile, it felt like a silent victory. For once, I had chosen right. For once, I wasn't the one chasing, fixing, managing chaos. In the months leading up to the wedding, I let myself dream. I pictured a house in the suburbs, maybe kids down the road, maybe even the kind of family Christmases where we didn't just tolerate each other, but actually felt whole. I wanted to believe I was building something stable, unshakable. But even in that ordinary world, there were cracks, small ones. Like the night Marcus came home late from work, his shirt rumpled, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. He brushed it off with a laugh, saying one of his clients had hugged him goodbye, and I let it slide because I didn't want to be the jealous fiancé. Or the time Lila showed up at my condo unannounced when Marcus was there, and the air between them shifted, just slightly, like a current I wasn't supposed to notice. She complimented his tie, too directly, too warmly, and he grinned wider than he should have. I remember brushing it off as sibling competitiveness. Lila always liked attention, and Marcus gave it freely. I told myself it was harmless. But the truth? That was the red flag. The moment that should have stopped me in my tracks came one evening in late spring, about 2 months before the wedding. I'd been working late on a client pitch, my laptop balanced on the kitchen counter, when I heard Marcus in the living room. He was on the phone, his voice low, casual, almost tender. "You looked incredible today," he said, laughing softly. "You always do." I assumed he was talking to a client, maybe flattering some wealthy investor, but then he added, "She has no idea. You're too good at this." I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my chest tightening. Before I could move, before I could decide whether to confront him, he ended the call. When I asked who it was, he smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Just work. Don't worry." And I didn't. I buried it. I let myself believe him because the alternative was unthinkable. Now, when I look back, I know that was the moment. The first crack that split everything wide open. The moment I should have asked questions, the moment I should have seen the truth, but I didn't. I poured another glass of wine, closed my laptop, and told myself I was lucky. And that mistake, ignoring the red flag, was the choice that made me the bride who raised her glass to loyalty on a wedding night built on lies. The morning of my wedding, I remember thinking nothing could ruin the day. Denver was glowing, sunlight pouring through the clouds like the city itself was blessing me. The air smelled of late summer roses and fresh rain from the night before. I woke to the sound of my bridesmaids chattering, curling irons buzzing, glasses of champagne clinking, and Lila was already there. She breezed into the bridal suite as though she owned the place, her pale blue dress draped over her arm, her hair still damp. "Relax, Sav," she said, dropping her bag on the chair. "Today's going to be perfect." She kissed my cheek, lingered a moment too long as she studied my face in the mirror, and then grinned. It was the kind of grin that didn't reach her eyes. I thought nothing of it then. We spent hours dressing, painting smiles on our faces, tucking nerves away with false laughter. I remember catching her reflection as she slipped into her dress. The bodice was cut a little lower than I remembered from the fitting. A detail I had missed, a detail she hadn't, but I told myself it was nothing. By the time I walked down the aisle, the orchestra swelling, Marcus waiting for me under that arch of flowers, my heart was so full it hurt. Every doubt, every tiny red flag, I smothered beneath the weight of love and expectation. He looked at me with those eyes, the ones that had convinced me I was the only woman in the world, and I believed. God help me, I believed. The ceremony passed like a dream. Vows, rings, applause. I was his. He was mine. Or so I thought. It wasn't until the reception, when the wine was flowing and the band was in full swing, that the dream began to crack. The ballroom was golden with light, laughter spilling like champagne over every table. Glasses clinked, plates of filet mignon and salmon disappeared, and for the first time that day, I felt myself relax. We had done it. We had survived the stress, the planning, the months of chaos. I didn't notice the way Marcus's eyes darted toward Lila when he thought I wasn't looking. I didn't catch the smirk she gave him over her glass. My mother did, her brow furrowed, but she said nothing. When the best man, Adrian, stood to give his toast, I leaned back against Marcus, my hand resting in his. I was ready for the embarrassing stories, the harmless jokes, the cliches about love and loyalty. Adrian tapped his glass with a knife, a cocky smile on his lips. The crowd hushed. "To Marcus and Savannah," he began. "The perfect couple. And let's not forget, Marcus is a lucky man. He didn't just win Savannah's heart. He managed to keep both Gregory sisters warm on those cold Denver nights." Laughter, gasps, applause that turned to murmurs. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, deafening in my ears, the way my chest seized so tight I thought I might faint. The floor swayed beneath me. And then I saw it. Marcus's face, not shocked, not outraged, just a flicker of panic. And then that laugh, forced, hollow. He raised his glass as if agreeing, as if joining in the joke. And Lila, my sister, my blood, she didn't even try to hide. She blushed, her lips curling into that knowing smile. She touched her hair, looked down, then up at me with eyes that dared me to deny it. That was the moment. The truth hit me with the force of a car crash. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't Adrian being drunk or careless. This was orchestrated. A performance. And the stars of the show? The man I just married and the sister who'd stood beside me in a pale blue dress were sitting there like the whole thing was an inside joke. My mother's hand brushed mine under the table, trembling. My father muttered something into his glass, his jaw tight. Around us, guests shifted, coughed, whispered. Some laughed nervously. Others stared at me with pity. And I sat frozen. My chest ached with betrayal, grief flooding me like ice water. Rage followed close behind, hot and consuming. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to tear the flowers from their vases and hurl them across the room. I wanted to drag Marcus by his perfect tie into the street and let the world see what he really was. But I didn't move. I lifted my champagne to my lips. My hand shook, but my smile didn't falter. The bubbles burned my throat, but I swallowed every drop because the humiliation was already complete. There was no saving face. Not tonight. As the toast ended and the music stumbled back into life, I looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. At the way he avoided my eyes, at the way his hand squeezed mine not with love, but with warning. Don't make a scene. That's what his grip said. And then, at Lila. She raised her glass, her eyes locked on mine, that smirk still there. Taunting, triumphant. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a slip. This was a message. They wanted me to know. They wanted the world to know. They had chosen to humiliate me not behind closed doors, not in whispers, but here, on my wedding night, before God, family, friends. It was calculated, cold, cruel. And in that instant, beneath the white lights of the ballroom and the pitying eyes of every guest, I made my decision. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction of my collapse. No, I would smile. I would play the part of the perfect bride. I would let them think they had won. And then I would destroy them. My rage crystallized into something sharper than grief, something colder than heartbreak. It was purpose. It was power. As Marcus kissed my cheek for the cameras, as Lila clapped along with the band, I whispered silently to myself, if you turned my wedding into a toast, then I'll turn your lives into a funeral march. And every single person in this room will watch. And that was the night Savannah Gregory stopped being the bride and became the executioner. People talk about weddings as beginnings. For me, mine was an ending. The end of innocence, the end of blind faith, the end of believing that love and family were enough. But in that same moment, something else was born inside me, a clarity sharper than grief. The morning after, I stood in the bathroom of our honeymoon suite, staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was still perfectly curled from the night before, pinned with tiny pearls, but my eyes looked hollow. Beside me, the sink was cluttered with Marcus's cologne, his watch, his cufflinks, traces of a man who had already betrayed me before our first night as husband and wife was even over. He slept sprawled across the bed in the other room, his phone buzzing on the nightstand. I didn't need to check it. I knew who it was. I knew who it would always be. For a few minutes, I let myself break. Silent tears slipping down my face, mascara bleeding into my cheeks. My chest shook as if my body were trying to push the grief out by force. But then, just as quickly as it came, it hardened. My tears dried. My breath steadied. I pressed my palms flat against the counter and whispered aloud, just to myself, "You will not get away with this." From that moment forward, I wasn't his wife. I was his executioner. Back in Denver, it almost became easy to pretend. Marcus slipped into the role of the doting husband, bringing me coffee in bed, texting me from the office, asking how my day had been. He played the part so well I almost laughed, because behind the scenes, I could feel the cracks widening. Lila, of course, was shameless. She came over for dinner one night, hugging me a little too tightly at the door, then sitting across the table with her leg crossed just so her dress revealed too much skin. She laughed at all of Marcus's jokes, touched his hand when she thought I wasn't looking. Once, when I stood to pour more wine, I caught their reflection in the window. Her lips brushing too close to his ear, his smile too quick, too familiar. They thought I didn't notice. They thought I was naive, too fragile to see what was in front of me. That was their mistake. Because I was watching everything. Every slip of the hand, every glance that lingered, every text that made his phone light up in the middle of the night. I memorized it all. And the more I saw, the more I realized something chilling. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. It wasn't carelessness. It was arrogance. Marcus had always been a man who thrived on control, who believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. Lila had always lived like consequences were for other people. Together, they were drunk on their own confidence, convinced I would never fight back. And that was the fuel I needed. At first, I considered leaving, packing a bag, walking away, starting over. But the thought curdled in my stomach. Leaving would mean surrender. It would mean letting them win, letting them laugh about me behind closed doors, letting my family pity me as the woman who lost both a husband and a sister. No, if I left quietly, their lives would go on untouched. And mine would be the only one shattered. That was unacceptable. The decision came to me one evening at dinner. We were at a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place Marcus liked to bring clients. The candlelight was low, the music soft, and across the table, he smiled at me as if we were the picture of a perfect couple. I asked about his day. He talked about the markets, about his boss, about a client who wanted to invest in real estate. His words blurred together until all I heard was the sound of a liar pretending he still had me fooled. When the waiter brought dessert, Marcus reached for my hand. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a husband, not a partner, but a man who had underestimated me so completely he didn't even realize his days of comfort were numbered. I smiled and said, "Everything's fine." And in that moment, I knew. I would not just survive this betrayal. I would dismantle it, piece by piece, brick by brick, until Marcus and Lila had nothing left. After that, every day became preparation. At brunch with my mother, I laughed, smiled, pretended life was bliss. But inside, I was cataloging every detail of Lila's comings and goings. At work, I polished presentations with a smile, but my mind replayed Marcus's words, tone, gestures, searching for cracks I could exploit. It was like a chess game, and I was learning the board. The beauty of betrayal is that it makes people sloppy. Marcus grew bolder, coming home later, brushing off questions with half answers. Lila grew careless, texting me less, avoiding my eyes when we met for coffee. They thought distance would make it less obvious. It only confirmed what I already knew. And I played the fool. I let Marcus believe his charm still worked on me. I let Lila believe I still saw her as my sister, not my rival. I let them both believe I was blind, fragile, broken. All the while, I was sharpening knives they couldn't see. The turning point came 2 weeks later, at a family dinner. We were all seated around my parents' table, the smell of roast chicken and rosemary filling the air. My father asked Marcus about work. My mother complimented Lila's dress. It was ordinary, almost boring, until it wasn't. I caught Marcus's hand brushing against Lila's under the table. Just a flicker, just a second, but enough. Enough to confirm what I already knew. Enough to ignite something in me that would never burn out. I didn't flinch. I didn't gasp. I didn't let them know I had seen it. Instead, I smiled, reached for my glass, and lifted it in a small toast. "To family," I said softly. My father nodded, my mother smiled, and the moment passed. But Marcus's eyes flicked toward me, suspicious for the briefest second. Lila shifted in her seat, her fork clattering against her plate. They thought I hadn't noticed. But that night, as I lay beside Marcus in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words echoed in my mind. To family. The irony cut deep. Family had betrayed me. Husband, sister, blood. And that was the night I decided, truly decided, that I would not forgive. I would not forget. I would make them pay. The next morning, as Marcus kissed me goodbye and Lila texted about sister brunch, I smiled. I hugged them. I played the role they expected. But inside, I was already mapping the first moves. They thought they had broken me. What they didn't know was that I had already begun. The first rule of revenge is patience. That was the lesson I taught myself in the weeks after my wedding night. I couldn't strike fast. Not yet. I had to strike clean. So I played the role they needed me to play. Marcus got the attentive wife, smiling beside him at dinners, asking about his day as if I cared about the markets and client portfolios. Lila got the loyal sister, sharing brunches, laughing at her stories, nodding along when she talked about her newest freelance gig that mysteriously paid her in cash. Behind that performance, though, I was studying them, mapping their weaknesses. I started with Marcus. He was careless in small ways. He left his phone face up on the counter, notifications lighting the screen with texts he thought I wouldn't notice. He scribbled notes on yellow pads and left them scattered across his desk. And when he logged into his laptop in front of me, he never bothered to shield the screen. I became a shadow at his side. If he answered a call on speaker, I listened. If he left his briefcase unzipped, I peeked. I memorized client names, bank accounts, upcoming deals. Not enough to make him suspicious, just enough to know where to look later. One night, when he came home late and passed out on the couch, I slid his phone from his pocket. My heart hammered so loud I thought it might wake him. I didn't dare unlock it. I couldn't risk him noticing a fingerprint smudge or the wrong password attempt. Instead, I tilted it just enough to let the screen light his last notification. "See you tomorrow. Same place." From Lila. The rage boiled, but I swallowed it. Because now I had a trail. Then I turned to my sister. Lila was impulsive, greedy, and reckless. She wanted the thrill of stealing, but she also wanted the rewards. New clothes, expensive dinners, a lifestyle she couldn't afford on her own. I watched her Instagram stories carefully. New handbags, spa days, weekend getaways. I knew Marcus was funding her, but I needed proof, so I offered to help. One afternoon, I accidentally mentioned a friend who could get her discounts on designer shoes, if she could show proof of income. She laughed, said she had receipts, and waved her phone in my face, scrolling through screenshots of transfers Marcus had sent her. My stomach clenched, but my face didn't move. I laughed, teased her about being spoiled, and let her think I hadn't seen enough. But I had. She trusted me, and that was her mistake. Of course, planning revenge isn't as simple as gathering secrets. You have to hide the hunt. And that was the hardest part. There were close calls. One evening, while Marcus showered, I opened his laptop, slipping a USB into the port. I'd bought it quietly, cash only, at an electronics shop across town. It was loaded with software to copy documents without leaving a trace. My hands shook as the files transferred. Tax documents, client accounts, wire transfers. The bathroom door creaked. Steam poured out. My pulse raced. I yanked the USB free just as he walked back into the bedroom, towel around his waist. He smiled at me, oblivious. "You waiting up for me?" he teased. I forced a smile and said, "Of course." Later that night, I lay awake beside him, clutching the tiny USB under the covers like it was the sharpest weapon I'd ever held. There were other moments, too. Once, Lila borrowed my laptop to check her email. I'd already installed tracking software on Marcus's accounts, but my stomach dropped as I watched her fingers fly across the keys. For a second, I thought she'd see something she wasn't supposed to, but she didn't. She handed the laptop back, too busy texting Marcus to notice me watching. Every brush with danger only made me bolder. Piece by piece, I built the case. Emails between Marcus and Lila, disguised with fake names but written in their voices. Screenshots of money transfers from his accounts to hers. Photos I took myself. Marcus's hand brushing hers at a restaurant when they thought no one was looking. Lila slipping out of his car late at night. I saved it all. Organized it into folders. Labeled it carefully. Financial, personal, visual. It was more than evidence. It was ammunition. And while I gathered proof, I built alliances too. I started with Marcus's assistant, Julia. She was sharp, overworked, underappreciated. I invited her for coffee one afternoon, played the concerned wife, asked about Marcus's schedule. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and confessed more than I expected. Marcus had been cutting corners, bending rules with client accounts, bragging that no one could catch him. I smiled, thanked her, and offered her a better job at my firm if she ever wanted to jump ship. Planting seeds. Making sure when the time came, she wouldn't protect him. With Lila, the alliances came easier. She was careless with friends. She gossiped when drunk. I took her out one night, fed her cocktails, listened as she bragged about Marcus, how he bought her jewelry, how he promised to fix things soon. She thought she was impressing me. She was only confirming what I already knew. The stakes rose every day. At work, I balanced deadlines with secret investigations. At home, I cooked dinners and kissed Marcus goodnight, even as I filed away the proof of his betrayal. At family gatherings, I smiled beside Lila, my arm around her shoulders, while I imagined the look on her face when everything fell apart. The mask grew heavier, but I wore it well. And then came the night I knew the plan was ready. It was late. Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch, TV flickering across his face. His phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with a message from Lila. "We need to be careful. She's not stupid." The words sent a thrill through me. She was right. I wasn't stupid, but she was too late. I already had everything I needed. I stood over Marcus, watching him sleep. The man I'd once thought would be my partner. My forever. His chest rose and fell, his lips parted in careless rest, while the life he thought he controlled teetered on the edge of ruin. And I smiled. Because the plan wasn't just half-formed anymore, it was finished. All that was left was to decide when and how to pull the trigger. The night I chose was deliberate. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A milestone that demanded a grand celebration, banquet hall, caterers, a guest list full of family, friends, and Marcus's colleagues. The perfect stage. When I walked into that ballroom, it was as though the wedding had never ended. Same chandeliers, same hushed laughter, same smiles stretched a little too thin. Only this time, I wasn't the naive bride. I was the executioner, dressed in black silk, carrying the quiet weight of everything I had gathered. Marcus kissed my cheek at the door, oblivious. Lila breezed past me, her perfume sharp as always, leaning in to whisper, "Let's try to get through one family event without drama, She smirked, certain she still held the upper hand. If only she knew. The evening unfolded like clockwork. Dinner, speeches, laughter. Marcus held court at the center table, boasting about a recent deal. Lila floated between groups, soaking up compliments on her dress. I played the role of attentive wife, dutiful daughter, supportive sister. And all the while, the evidence burned in my clutch. USB drive, screenshots, photos, recordings. Proof stacked so high it could crush them with a single blow. When dessert was served and the band quieted, I rose from my chair. Forks stilled, conversations faded. My mother smiled, expecting a toast in honor of her and my father. Marcus looked up, distracted but calm. Lila's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Tonight, I began, my voice steady. We celebrate 40 years of loyalty, commitment, and love. Applause rippled, warm and polite. I let it fade before I spoke again. But loyalty, I continued, my tone sharpening, isn't always easy to find. Sometimes, the people we trust most teach us what betrayal really means. The air shifted. Guests glanced at each other, unease spreading like smoke. Marcus's smile faltered. Lila crossed her arms, forcing a laugh. I pulled the USB from my clutch and held it up. I've spent months gathering the truth. And tonight, you're all going to see it. Gasps. Whispers. My father set down his glass with a heavy clink. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest. I walked to the projector the venue had set up for a slideshow of old family photos. Instead, I slid in my own drive. The screen flickered. And then, chaos. First came the messages. Dozens of texts, projected larger than life. Last night was incredible. She has no idea. Soon, we won't have to hide. Marcus's name at the top. Lila's responses below, full of hearts and kisses. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a few muffled laughs from those who had suspected all along. My mother covered her mouth, shaking her head. My father's face turned crimson. Marcus shot to his feet. "Savannah, turn this off." But I wasn't finished. Next came the transfers. Screenshots of Marcus's accounts. Thousands of dollars funneled into Lila's name. Dates, amounts, receipts. Enough to prove he wasn't just unfaithful. He was reckless. Guests leaned forward, eyes wide. A colleague of Marcus's whispered something into his wife's ear, both of them glaring. And then, the photos. Lila, slipping into Marcus's car at midnight. Marcus's hand on her thigh at a restaurant. A blurry but undeniable shot of them kissing outside her apartment. The silence was deafening. I turned back to the crowd, my voice like ice. This is the man I married. And this is the sister I trusted. Marcus lunged toward me, desperate to grab the USB. But Julia, his assistant, the one I'd carefully won over, stepped in. She handed me a folder I'd asked her to keep safe until tonight. Inside were documents proving Marcus's misconduct at work. Falsified reports, manipulated client accounts, emails bragging that no one would ever catch him. I held them high. And for those of you who trusted him with your money, this is how he's been repaying you. The room roared. A client stood, shouting. Another stormed out, phone in hand, already dialing. Marcus's face drained of color. Lila stammered, reaching for him, but he shoved her away. "You set me up," he hissed at me, his voice low but audible. I smiled. "No, Marcus. You set yourself up. I just kept the receipts." The final blow came last. I returned to the microphone, letting the chaos simmer, then raised my hand for silence. "There's one more thing," I said softly, almost tenderly. "Something you both should know." The guests leaned in. Marcus's hands balled into fists. Lila's lip trembled. "I knew," I continued, "that my wedding day would be the start of something new. That's why, weeks before, I made sure every asset in my name was protected, every account locked, every inheritance secured." I looked directly at Lila. "You'll never see a dime." Then at Marcus. "And you? You'll never recover." And with that, I revealed the prenup. Ironclad. Signed. Filed. Public. It left Marcus with nothing but debts and shame. Everything else, my home, my finances, my future, was mine alone. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. My mother sobbed into her hands. My father nodded once, a grim kind of pride in his eyes. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, stunned. Lila crumpled beside him, tears streaking her face, her makeup running like ink. I raised my glass, my voice cutting through the noise one final time. "To loyalty," I said, the same words I'd spoken on my wedding night. And this time, no one clapped. The silence itself was victory. That was the night Marcus lost his career, his clients, his reputation. The night Lila lost her family, her standing, every ounce of credibility she had left. And it was the night I walked away, not as a broken bride, but as the woman who had orchestrated their ruin. There would be whispers, of course, headlines maybe, fallout that rippled for years. But the outcome was sealed in that ballroom. I didn't just expose their betrayal. I ended it. The ballroom emptied in chaos. Guests filed out whispering, some angry, some shaken, some pretending not to have seen anything at all. My mother wouldn't meet Lila's eyes. My father walked past Marcus without a word. And I stayed until the last candle burned low, watching the wreckage of two people who thought they had me fooled. Marcus sat hunched at the table, his tie pulled loose, his face gray. His phone buzzed again and again, clients demanding answers, partners pulling out, colleagues severing ties. Each vibration was another nail in the coffin of the empire he'd built on lies. Lila was worse. She had collapsed into herself, mascara streaking her cheeks, her once perfect hair tangled in her fists. She tried to speak to me as I passed, reaching for my wrist. "Sav, please." I looked down at her hand, the same hand that had held my husband's in secret, and shook it off like ash. "You made your choice, Lila. Live with it." Her sobs echoed as I walked away. The days that followed were a storm Marcus couldn't outrun. By Monday, 3 of his largest clients had pulled their accounts. By Wednesday, his firm suspended him pending investigation. By Friday, headlines splashed across Denver business journals. Financial advisor accused of misconduct, client funds in question. His face was everywhere. Not the smiling man from our engagement photos, but a disgraced fraud, branded and finished. He tried to call me, of course. Voicemails full of pleading, bargaining, even rage. I didn't answer a single one. Lila fared no better. My parents cut her off, refusing to take her calls. Friends distanced themselves. Her little freelance gigs dried up once people realized her luxury wasn't self-made, but funded by stolen affection and dirty money. For the first time in her life, she had no audience. And me? I thrived. My colleagues at the firm treated me with a quiet reverence, a mix of pity and admiration. Friends who had once doubted me leaned closer, whispering about how strong I was. My parents, though shaken, finally looked at me not as the daughter who followed the rules, but as the daughter who survived the fire. The whispers shifted. I wasn't pitiful anymore. I was powerful. But victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Like the morning I watched Marcus leave our condo for the last time, 2 suitcases in hand, his eyes hollow. He had no job, no reputation, no money that wasn't tied to debts. I stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, and asked calmly, "Where will you go?" He muttered something about staying with a friend. His voice cracked. "Good luck," I said simply, and shut the door. That was the last time I saw him. Weeks turned into months. The scandal deepened. Investigations uncovered fraud, tax evasion, falsified accounts. Marcus wasn't just humiliated. He was indicted. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, the photo hit every news site in the state. Lila sat in the courtroom that day, pale and trembling, but even she couldn't save him. She was just another spectator now. And when he was sentenced, she didn't look at me once. That should have been enough. It should have satisfied me, seeing him stripped of everything, seeing her cast out into the cold. But the truth? Revenge is addictive, and that's why I saved one last card. It was a family dinner, months after Marcus's conviction. Smaller now, quieter. My parents, some cousins, a few relatives who hadn't fled from the shame. And Lila. She showed up in a faded dress, no makeup, her hair pulled into a messy knot. She looked older, thinner, a shadow of the sister I once knew. She took her place at the table, eyes down, silent. Halfway through the meal, I set down my fork and looked straight at her. "I should thank you," I said softly. The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. Lila swallowed. "For what?" she whispered. "For showing me who you really are. For proving I was stronger than you ever thought." her eyes filled with tears. "Savannah, I made a mistake. I lost everything. Isn't that enough?" I leaned forward, my voice calm, deliberate. "No, Lila. You haven't lost everything." I slid an envelope across the table. She hesitated before opening it. And when she did, the color drained from her face. Inside were photos. Her. Marcus. Together. From before the wedding. Proof that their affair had begun long before anyone suspected. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was the document beneath them. A legal affidavit. A sworn statement I had filed quietly, months ago, naming her as a co-conspirator in Marcus's fraud. Because some of those transfers weren't just gifts. They were stolen funds laundered through her accounts. Her voice cracked. "You wouldn't." I smiled. "I already did." My parents gasped. Cousins exchanged glances. Lila's hands shook, the paper rattling. "You wanted his money, his attention, his place in my life," I said coldly. "Now you can share his punishment." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father set down his knife. My mother wiped her eyes. "And Lila?" She broke, sobbing, trembling, begging. But there was no escape. Because the truth was, I hadn't just destroyed Marcus. I'd tied her fate to his. And when he went down, she went with him. That was the final twist. They thought my wedding toast was the peak of humiliation. They thought they had turned me into a joke. But I turned them into a cautionary tale. Marcus, the once golden advisor, now a convicted fraud. Lila, the sister who thought she'd stolen my life, now branded an accomplice. And me? I raised my glass one last time, in the quiet of that fractured family dinner, and said the words that had haunted me since the beginning. To loyalty. This time, no one dared look away. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. Betrayal always leaves scars, but sometimes, justice leaves its mark even deeper. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever witnessed a betrayal this cold, or lived through something that still echoes today? Share your thoughts or your own experiences down in the comments. And if this story kept you hooked, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more tales of revenge and justice waiting for you here.